They say marriage is about trust and partnership, but sometimes the person sleeping next to you for 50 years is a complete stranger. I'm Evelyn Clarke, born in 1950 in Melbourne, and at 74, I thought I knew everything about my life. Until one autumn afternoon shattered every assumption I'd ever held, back in March of last year, when Harold passed away from his heart condition. I was drowning in grief and paperwork. The funeral arrangements, the condolence calls, the endless stream of casseroles from neighbors, it all felt like moving through thick fog. I felt lost and overwhelmed. But then something happened that changed everything. Today, at 74, and sitting in my small Brisbane apartment, I'm finally sharing this because someone out there needs to hear that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. If you're listening, drop your location below. And please subscribe. This gets much deeper. It was a Tuesday when I finally gathered the courage to go through Harold's desk. The mahogany beast had been his sanctuary for decades, filled with insurance, papers, old photographs, and what I assumed were boring financial documents. I'd been putting it off for weeks, but the lawyer kept asking about Harold's will, and I couldn't find the copy he'd supposedly left for me. That's when I found it tucked between his collection of vintage car magazines and a stack of unpaid bills. The envelope was cream-colored, official-looking, with last will and testament of Harold James Clarke printed in bold letters across the top. My hands trembled as I opened it, expecting to see the usual provisions. Everything to me. Small amounts. To our children Oliver and Sophia. Maybe something for our granddaughter Emma. Instead, I read words that made my blood turn to ice. I, Harold James Clarke, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my entire estate, including all properties, investments, and personal belongings, to Clare Henderson of 42 Maple Street, Brisbane. Clare Henderson. I stared at that name until the letters blurred together. Who was Clare Henderson? In 52 years of marriage, Harold had never mentioned anyone by that name. Not once. I flipped through the pages frantically, looking for some explanation, some mention of me, his wife of 5 decades. There it was, buried in the legal jargon. To my wife, Evelyn Clarke, I leave the sum of $1, acknowledging her legal right as my spouse. $1. 52 years of cooking his meals, washing his clothes, raising his children, supporting his dreams are worth exactly $1 in his eyes, but the real knife to my heart came at the bottom of the document. The witness signatures: Oliver Clarke, Sophia Clarke. My own children had signed this document. They knew. They had known all along that their father was leaving everything to a complete stranger, and they had said nothing. I called Oliver first, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial his number. "Mum, I can explain," he said before I could even speak. His voice was tight, guilty. "Dad made us promise not to tell you. He said it would be easier this way." "Easier?" I whispered. "Easier for whom, Oliver?" "Certainly not for me. Look, Mum, Clare is. She was important to Dad. He wanted to take care of her. You'll be fine. You have the pension, and we'll help you if you need anything." The casual way he dismissed my entire life, my contributions, my worth, it was like being slapped. I hung up and immediately called Sophia, hoping for different answers, for some loyalty from my daughter. "Oh, Mum." Sophia sighed when I confronted her. "I told Dad this was wrong, but he was so insistent. He said you'd never understand that. You were too set in your ways to accept that he had other relationships. The words echoed in my empty house. My husband of 52 years had other relationships, and my children thought this was perfectly acceptable. They had all conspired to keep me in the dark while planning my financial destruction. That night, I sat in Harold's favorite armchair, the one I'd reupholstered 3 times over the years, and tried to piece together the clues I'd missed. The late nights he claimed were work meetings, the unexplained charges on our credit card statements, the way he'd become distant and secretive in his final years, always on his phone, always stepping outside to take calls. I thought about Clare Henderson, this mystery woman who was now entitled to everything I'd helped build. Our house in Paddington, the one I'd lovingly decorated and maintained. Harold's investment portfolio, grown fat from the money I'd saved by clipping coupons and shopping sales for decades. Even his collection of vintage watches, including the Rolex I'd given him for our 25th anniversary. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was existential. Harold had erased me from his future, reduced me to a legal footnote worth $1. But worse than his betrayal was my children's complicity. They had looked me in the eye at his funeral, hugged me, told me everything would be okay, all while knowing I was about to lose everything. I spent the next 3 days in a haze of rage and disbelief. I barely ate, couldn't sleep, and found myself talking to Harold's photograph, demanding answers he could never give. "Who was she, Harold?" I asked about his smiling face. "What did she give you that I couldn't? What did I do wrong?" But then, on Friday morning, something shifted inside me. I was standing in my kitchen, looking out at the garden I'd tended for 30 years, when I realized I was asking the wrong questions. Instead of wondering what I'd done wrong, I should be asking what I was going to do about it. I picked up the phone and called James Mitchell, the lawyer who'd handled our family's legal affairs for years. "James," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in days, "I need to see you immediately, and I need to know everything about inheritance law in Queensland." James Mitchell's office smelled like leather and old books, a comforting contrast to the chaos in my mind. He listened patiently as I explained the situation, his weathered face growing more concerned with each detail. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said something that changed everything. "Evelyn, there's a provision in Queensland law that might help you. If the beneficiary refuses the inheritance, it reverts to the next of kin, in this case, you." "But why would she refuse?" I asked, feeling a spark of hope for the first time in days. "That," James said with a slight smile, "depends on what kind of person Clare Henderson is. And that's something you'll need to find out for yourself." I drove to 42 Maple Street that very afternoon, my heart pounding as I pulled up to a modest weatherboard house with a well-maintained garden. Clare Henderson answered the door, a woman about my age with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a simple bun. She looked nothing like the homewrecker I'd imagined. "You must be Evelyn," she said softly. "I've been expecting you. Please, come in." Her living room was filled with photographs of Harold at restaurants I'd never been to, Harold on holidays I'd never taken, Harold laughing in ways I hadn't seen in years. But there were no romantic photos, no intimate moments captured, just two people who seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company. "I need you to know," Clare said, pouring tea with steady hands. "Harold never spoke badly of you. He said you were a good woman, a devoted mother, but that you'd grown apart over the years. He felt you found him burdensome." The word hit me like a physical blow. Burdensome. Is that how Harold saw my care, my concern, my attempts to manage his health and our household? "I was trying to take care of him," I whispered. "I know," Clare said gently, "but Harold felt controlled, not cared for. He came to me for conversation, for someone who would listen without trying to fix everything. We were friends, Evelyn, just friends. I never wanted his money or his house. I have my own life, my own savings." We talked for 2 hours, and slowly, a picture emerged of my husband's final years that I'd never seen. Harold had felt suffocated by my efficiency, my need to organize and manage every aspect of our lives. To him, my love had felt like criticism, my care like control. "Will you refuse the inheritance?" I asked as I prepared to leave. Clare nodded without hesitation. "I'll sign the papers tomorrow. This was never about money, and I won't be the reason you lose everything you've worked for. The next phase of my plan involved my children, and it would be far less pleasant than my conversation with Clare." I invited Oliver and Sophia to lunch at our family home, what I still thought of as my home, and watched their faces as I explained Clare's decision to refuse the inheritance. "That's wonderful, Mum," Sophia said, relief evident in her voice. "Now everything can go back to normal." "Normal?" I set down my teacup with deliberate precision. "You think we can go back to normal after what you've done?" Oliver shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, we were just trying to respect Dad's wishes. We didn't want to hurt you, so instead, You decided to let me discover my husband's betrayal through legal documents? You let me believe, for 52 years, that I was building a life with someone who valued me, when all along you knew he was planning to leave me with nothing. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared, filled with bank statements and loan documents. Since we're talking about respect and family loyalty, let's discuss the $43,000 I lent you for your house deposit, Oliver, and the $28,000 I gave you for Emma's private school fees, Sophia. Money I saved from my household budget. Money I never asked you to repay because you were my children. Their faces went pale. They'd forgotten about those loans. Or perhaps they'd never considered them real debts because they came from their mother. I'm calling in those loans, I continued. Full repayment within 60 days with interest. And I'm establishing a trust fund for Emma. She's the only one in this family who's shown me genuine love and respect. The rest of my estate will go to charity when I die. Mom, you can't be serious, Oliver protested. We're your children. Yes, you are. And you chose to betray me just like your father did. Actions have consequences. And this is yours. I sold the Paddington house within 3 months, despite their protests and attempts at reconciliation. The memories there were too tainted, too heavy with the weight of deception. I found a small apartment in New Farm, overlooking the Brisbane River, and for the first time in decades, I decorated it exactly as I wanted: bright colors, modern furniture, plants everywhere. I joined a women's writing circle at the local library, where I met Margaret, a widow who'd also discovered her husband's secret life after his death. We became fast friends, bonding over our shared experience of late-life betrayal and renewal. Through the writing exercises, I began to process my anger and grief, turning them into something productive. I also took a part-time job at a local bakery, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the time for when I was managing Harold's life. The simple pleasure of kneading dough, of creating something beautiful and nourishing, filled a void I hadn't even known existed. Oliver sent several letters attempting reconciliation, but they were filled with justifications rather than genuine apologies. He couldn't understand why I wouldn't simply forgive and forget, why I insisted on treating their betrayal as seriously as I did. But Emma, my granddaughter, surprised me. At 19, she had a wisdom that her parents lacked. "Grandma, Evie," she said during one of our coffee dates, "I think you're the strongest person I know. You could have just accepted what happened and felt sorry for yourself. But instead, you took control." Emma was studying photography at university, and she asked if she could document my new life for a project called What Strength Looks Like. The photos she took of me at the bakery, laughing with my writing group, tending my apartment garden, showed a woman I barely recognized. A woman who looked free. The final piece of my transformation came 6 months later, when I found Harold's vintage Rolex in a box of his belongings I'd been avoiding. Instead of keeping it as a bitter reminder, I took it to an antique dealer and sold it for $8,000. With that money, I bought a one-way ticket to Lisbon. I'd always wanted to see Portugal, to walk the cobblestone streets and taste the pastéis de nata I'd read about in travel magazines. Harold had always dismissed my travel dreams as impractical, expensive, unnecessary. As I packed my red leather notebook, the one where I'd been writing my story, I realized this wasn't a tale about what I'd lost. It was about what I'd taken back. My autonomy, my dignity, my right to choose my own path. At 74, I was finally free to discover who Evelyn Clarke really was, beyond the roles of wife and mother that had defined me for so long. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had instead become the catalyst for my rebirth. Moral lesson: sometimes the greatest gift comes wrapped in the cruelest betrayal, teaching us that our worth was never dependent on others' recognition, but on our courage to reclaim ourselves.